Well, hello again. It is actually April the 5th, and it's Friday, so it's kind of the end of the week. And we talked somewhat yesterday about politics and things going on in the marketplace and so on and so forth. And again today, in looking at the market, we're looking at some downs. There are people who are now looking at some issues, and things are not all that great. So we're slowing down to some degree. Pretty much normal, flattened. It's been a good week, actually, for the market in general. And so people tend to take profits at the end of a period of time, whatever that period of time is, depending on circumstances and how the market goes. So the market today is just taking back some. In some cases, Boeing has a problem, and Boeing is going to have to take a hit that way. Amazon had the divorce decree, and that didn't affect them very much, actually. It wasn't too bad. It was kind of interesting to see how that all played out. They very carefully did things in a way that made it so the market didn't respond all that dramatically. So at least today, and it is now about 10:30, 11, so you're always getting the early part of the day, and crazy things can happen towards the end of the day, especially on Fridays. Fridays tends to be kind of either a nothing day where everybody goes home early and has a party, or they get crazy and they do silly things at the end of the day. So we'll wait and see how that all goes. Anyway, really for today, what I wanted to talk about was debt, because debt is one of those things that is misunderstood in a lot of ways. And how we spend money as a country, and how do we do things, especially today we have a lot of political noise out there that discusses how we're going to spend money and how can we do infrastructure and how are things going to go. And of course, we took a huge amount of money and gave it to corporations as a hit for them. And this was supposed to actually start pushing the economy higher. Well, the economy is not bad. It's been loping along, but hasn't done that much. And a lot of it actually has been that the companies that got all of these great kind of pluses in their column for capital that they have are sitting on it. They're really not doing very much. In fact, most of the money that has been a benefit to them, whether it came in from offshore or whether it was from the tax relief or what have you, is primarily gone to stock buybacks. We've talked about this before, not a big issue. It's not the best way to do that for the economy in general, but it's good for the corporation itself because they can buy back stock. That means their stock value is, given what it is, goes up. So it makes the corporation happy and the stockholders happy, but in fact, probably doesn't do a whole lot for the economy in general. So we know a lot of that money really didn't go to a lot of good use along the way. That the next issue is probably the Fed itself. The Fed has been being pushed around by the politics, and the Fed is one of those things where usually they're not supposed to be pushed around by that. The Fed has come back and upped the Fed rate last year by a few. Actually 4 times, about a quarter of a point each time. And of course, everybody has bitched about that, the president and the Congress and companies and corporations and the market. Nobody wants that because borrowing money at at about a zero interest rate, stop and think about it for a second. If your inflation rate is about 2%, which is kind of what it is at the moment, depending on how you want to measure it, it's not 2% when you and I want to go to buy gasoline or something, but it's 2% in general. That by and large, that 2% is, you have to subtract that from, whatever the Fed is doing. So that basically people are still buying money at a very, very low rate. And the Fed has essentially this year said, well, we're going to hold off. We're not going to go up any farther. And so the question comes out as far as debt goes, what the heck does the Fed do? What's their point behind all of this? Well, the Fed Bank is actually a fascinating thing. It has a huge history going back all the way to Washington and Hamilton and Jefferson. The fight has been going on for that long. We've had a bank that's been thrown out. It's been put back in again. It's been thrown out. And this one, I think, actually comes into the 60s and 70s, someplace where they kind of reestablished what it was doing. A lot of the debt that came in the crash of 2008 was paid for by the Fed. So all of that money that went to corporations to bail the corporations out and such really came from the Fed. And the Fed ended up with a huge debt that they have to deal with at some point. So I forget what the number is at the moment, but it's a big number, trillions. And so that the Fed has to eventually sell that debt, because that's what the Fed does. The Fed, if Congress wants to spend some money, essentially the Fed has to provide that money. They're kind of like the bank. So that if President Trump wants to go and do $1 trillion in infrastructure, he's got to go to the Fed and he's got to ask them for that $1 trillion. Well, it doesn't actually work that way, but in essence, for simplicity, that's the way it works. And the Fed then produces that money. Now, the trouble is that we now have debt. So the Fed is building up this debt. And at the moment, I don't know, our total debt is about $22 trillion. About 16 trillion of that is actually sold to other people in the world. So, I mean, the 22 million is broken into two chunks. One is actually the U.S. government essentially writing an IOU and throwing it into a box and saying, well, I owe you something. And then the rest of it is what we sell. So the federal bank sells that to other countries. And in order to make that attractive to other people to buy the debt, the interest rate has to go up. Remember, this is when people buy our debt, they're expecting us to pay them back and pay them back with some interest. So it's kind of like we're taking a loan out from somebody else, and they're expecting us to actually give them the money back plus an interest on top of it. Now, the more debt you have, and maybe kind of like whether you're a good guy or a bad guy, that interest rate can go higher or lower. So in our lives, in our regular day in, day out lives, depending on your credit rating, so if you have a really great credit rating, and there's a number that deals with that, it's 600, 700, 800, 500, 400, whatever that number is. When you go to buy, let's say, a car, they're going to look at that credit rating and say, well, we'll give you a loan, but that loan's going to cost you so much in interest. That interest will rise and fall depending on how good your credit is. So if you're a really great credit risk and you have wonderful credit and everything else, that rate that you buy that car at might be very low. It might be 3 or 4%, something along that line. If you want to buy that car and you have crappy credit, then that bank is going to give you money, but it's going to give you money at 16% or something along that line. And curiously enough, we stop and think about, okay, that's you and I. The federal government actually works pretty much the same way. So the federal bank actually now has this huge chunk of debt that it has to kind of deal with at some point. And if they keep spending these huge amounts of money, trillions of dollars, it makes it tough on the bank because they have to sell that. They have to go out into the world and say, okay, guys, I want you to buy that debt. And some of those people are not willing to buy it at the low percentage rate we have. They're going to want more. So that kind of pushes that number around. Now, there's going to be people who argue with me that that's not really true, that's kind of a generalization that may not be true in all cases. And actually, they're right. So it's not just that simple. But when we talk about it in our terms, the terms we can think of on a day-to-day basis, you and I, that, whether what we do, work, struggle, retire, whatever, that it really does make a big difference at times. So for us, that's the easiest way to kind of explain it. So as we go forward, what's going to give us good jobs and things? Well, jobs are really created by people going off and doing something. So we want to fix a road, we want to build a bridge, we want to give companies, some money for new equipment or, better capitalization, better products. And if they do it right, then they hire more people will be at work, they make more money, and what happens when people make money? Hey, they go out and spend it. Now, the one thing I always thought was rather fascinating is the old trickle-down issue that came from the Reagan era. Trickle-down doesn't work, never did. That you give all the money to the rich people and they will eventually give it back to you. No, doesn't work. They keep the money. And what we've seen over the past 10 or 15, 20 years maybe even, that the gap between the haves and the have-nots keeps getting wider and wider and wider. So the people that have most of the money and most of the power are getting smaller and smaller in percentages. So there's like 1% of the people in the world pretty much own 85% of everything. And all the rest of it comes falling down to us. So that's what trickle-down essentially has done. I'm a trickle-up guy. Give us, citizens, all the money. We'll spend it. Hell, that's what we do. We don't save money. We go out, we spend it on whatever, cars, boats, trains, houses, whatever. We buy stuff. That's what we do. We're consumers. We're the consumer economy, and we will spend it. So if you give us money, we'll spend it, and they get it anyway. So the money goes uphill, called trickle up in my world. So give us the money and let it trickle up. Hasn't been working that way. So what we really need to do is have a big shift, I think, in how we look at these things. And again, going back to debt, you and I don't need to be in debt. One of the things that I've always kind of learned the hard way was you really need to spend what you can get. You need what you have on the bank. So if you have $100, go spend your $100. Do whatever you want to do with it, but don't go out and borrow $100 to do it. Debt is a bad thing. It's bad for everybody. It's bad for the federal government. It's bad for you and I, and we need to not go into debt. That's not to say we shouldn't spend money. Spend it when you can, but if you really don't have it, don't spend it. And my adage to the federal government would be, stop doing that. I mean, giving away $1.5 trillion to people that don't need it is not a very good idea. But we did it. So how do we go forward? I don't know. It's really difficult. It's going to be a big political deal. Next 2020 elections, we're going to see an awful lot about that. So anyway, debt for today. Debt is bad, whether it's the feds or whether it's us. We need to deal in real capital, but in order for us on our end of the pile to do that, we need jobs. We need to be able to have more jobs, more people going to work, more people getting a paycheck. And once those people get the paycheck, guess what? They go to Walmart. They spend money. They go to Target. They spend money. We're good at that. It's one of the things we really do well. So go out there. Hopefully we can find more jobs. Hopefully we get households that are more able to spend money and let them go out and make the economy better. That's how the economy really gets better, not silly rules that people are looking at that really don't mean much to the average Main Street person. Most of that stuff has been jigged around a bit so that the people that are on the other end of the pile kind of makes them look good, but it doesn't make us work better. Okay, have a good day. Bye-bye.